I recently had the pleasure of sitting down for a conversation with Daren White. He is an educator, he's a technologist, a presenter, trainer, writer, thinker. So we had a sit down to catch up and talk about some of his perspectives on AI in education today. So here's what he had to say. Daren White, very nice to see you again. We've spoken a couple of times in the past, and it's always been very enjoyable, but it's always been about a particular kind of software or education or something like that. So it's nice to just have a kind of more general, relaxed talk about things, because you're an interesting guy. I follow your LinkedIn posts and things, and I see you've been posting quite a lot more frequently recently.
Kind of in two places at once to a certain extent. So I work for a large multi-academy trust in the UK. We're one of the largest. We've got 57 schools. So I work for Academies Enterprise Trust, and I'm the academic technologies lead for the trust. So supporting our 57 schools with the impactful use of technology from a learning perspective. But I've also got other hats in that I'm co-leader of the Google Educator Group for the UK. And have done a fair bit of other work, sort of freelance consultancy through external companies like Apps Events and Happy to Host and people like that. So I get the opportunity, very fortunately, to sometimes combine the two and to sometimes make the choice to go one way or the other. So I'm kind of like that it's the best of both worlds, and quite often the two dovetail together really nicely. So
it sounded like you were more doing your own thing now.
I'm still very much working within the trust, and you know, that's my day to day. I think the kind of the doing my own thing came off the back actually of fairly recent experience. I was very fortunate to apply and to be selected to attend the very first Google Champion Symposium in Dublin back in November.
I did see that actually, yeah.
Yeah, so we had a large number of us. I think there was about 140 of us, Google champions, all over in Dublin at Google's head office over there for 3 days. And we had a really kind of packed 3 days of activities, keynotes, opportunities, workshops, real kind of like mind-bending, get yourself out your comfort zone kind of stuff. And the kind of the doing my own thing side of things really came off the back of, I think, talking to people there in general, but also a particular workshop that was run by Brittany Bowering, who used to work for AJ Smart and now runs her own business and does a lot of workshopping. She was co-hosting the day with my good friend Dean, or co-hosting the event, should I say, but she also ran a workshop around personal branding and all that kind of thing. And it just really prompted me to clarify and to try to streamline my message a little bit more and focus more on connections rather than followers. And to try to ask more questions than I give opinions.
Right.
Which is probably why, as you say, you've seen more of a kind of uptake, particularly in LinkedIn.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's one of those things. I think it's really exploded in the last 12 months, LinkedIn. Possibly, you know, as a correlation to things that are going on with X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it. I do think it's a really good platform for very open and honest challenge of thought in the right kind of way, rather than that kind of binary approach that can often happen via other platforms, shall we say.
It manages to kind of just skirt the negativity, doesn't it, that you get everywhere else, I suppose.
Yeah. So that's been a conscious effort on my part to add a few more strings to my bow in terms of looking at some other things that I can offer to the trust in terms of workshop facilitation and design thinking and all those kind of things. I'm currently working on like developing and practicing graphic recording and things like that, because they're all really useful in their own different environments. And there's times where I've been part of, or where I think, it would have been really good to have some graphic capturing going on there.
What do you mean graphic capturing? Sorry.
So sketchnoting and graphic recording of the key threads from an event, and capturing the essential kind of themes and foci from a particular workshop or from a keynote or from an event, and doing that in a visual way, to make it much easier, for people who, particularly like myself, who are neurodivergent, to be able to dual code and to be able to take in that information quickly and effectively, rather than me kind of trying to sit down and read pages and pages of documents where I will just zone out completely.
Right.
So yeah, kind of embracing those alternative approaches for communication, really.
Now that's interesting. And maybe you can explain exactly what neurodivergency is.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, because none of us are experts in anything.
Yeah.
I can only say from my own experience, 47 and a half years in, I was diagnosed with ADHD, having gone through the assessment off the back of actually my wife going through the assessment, and that prompting me to do the same, because I noticed an awful lot of similarities. And I think that's possibly a little bit why things have changed for me in the last year as well, because it's given me an opportunity, not an opportunity, give me a lens onto me, if you like, that I hadn't fully appreciated before. So it's helped me understand me and my thought processes, choices I've made over time, and things like that, in a much better way. Some of those choices have been brilliant, some not so. But it's massively kind of helped to give me an opportunity to kind of take a step back, have a think about how my brain works, what works in my favor, because there are some things that I'm really, really strong at, and there are other things that I'm not so good at, and there are things that I need to be more aware and more conscious of than perhaps I have been in the past, that I wasn't necessarily alert to, so fell into all sorts of problems about trying to please everybody and taking on too much work, which obviously then has a knock-on effect on your mental health and everything else, which I'm very open about. I've had my struggles in the past. Were they as much mental health issues in terms of depression and anxiety, or were they side effects, if you like, of the ADHD, and it was just misdiagnosed? I don't know. I suspect there's a little bit of that in it, but it's made me focus more, and particularly with decision making, try to step out of my own kind of body, if you like, before I make a decision, and try and look at it from a different perspective, because I am susceptible to and the word escapes me, kind of like being very reactive. Like things like Amazon are a nightmare for me, because I'll see something and go, I really love one of those. Amazon's got it.
Impulsive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the end, there we go. So I have to. I've learned to, with things like online shopping, I've learned to put things in the basket, close the basket, close it down, and come back to it 2 days later. And if it's still there, I probably want it.
Yeah.
Rather than clicking the buy now, because that's not good, So yeah, I've learned. Well, I'm learning to manage that better, shall we say? In all, not just with online shopping, but with all things,
Yeah. I think that's just generally kind of good advice for everybody there, isn't it, really? Kind of take a step back and try to think about things from a slightly different perspective, and perhaps you will get more favorable results. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of unusual to have that happen at such a late age, and most people wouldn't end up seeking a diagnosis for something like that, I suppose. At that kind of age,
because of my wife,
and
it's been a game changer for her. She won't mind me saying, she now takes medication, and it's been an absolute game changer for her. I've chosen not to take any medication because I have other underlying issues that I don't want to mess about with or
Yeah.
compromise in any way, shape, or form. So I try and manage it. And at the moment, it's going all right. So, but it's been a big learning curve for both of us, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is
Bit deep, wasn't it?
well, you think that's deep. We haven't even got started yet. But yeah, no, I love hearing about things like that. It's it's just very open and honest, and it's great to just learn real things from other people like that, things that people don't always talk about.
No, that's it. And I think that's been another focus over the last probably 18 months to 2 years, is to make a real effort and to be authentic, to be who I am, but also to be open about vulnerabilities. And I think working in education quite often, now I was a teacher for 24 years. I was a senior leader for 10 years. I'm now working within, obviously, the central team within our trust, and supporting all of those schools. It's very easy to kind of focus on feeling like you have to know everything. So if you're going to stand up in front of a group of staff, feeling like you have to be the expert, and that putting you into that difficult situation of, okay, well, I want to look like the expert, so possibly I'm not going to take questions because I don't want any curveballs. I'm only going to do things that are really tightly planned because I don't want anything untoward happening. And actually, I'm very conscious and very open about lifting the lid off of that and actually saying, do you know what? And I'm fortunate because I do a lot of training around technology, that works in my favor anyway, because I can then use that vulnerability, be open about it, and that in itself brings people along, because you can be very much the training I did this morning. So myself and a colleague, Ben, went and did some training at a school on Google Workspace. We opened up our own Google Workspace, and there'd been a change in that our chat spaces had changed and the organization was different. And that was just a really good example of how, you go from that unconscious competence, that really comfortable place where everything's just automatic, to suddenly one thing changes and you're thrown down into that conscious incompetence, and you're like, oh my God, where's it all gone? But that was a really good illustration for that group of 30 odd staff of how we then as a group support and manage the transition from being comfortable with your unconscious competence, getting thrown into the conscious incompetence, and then managing that move across to that conscious competence where the skill's all important, but you're still putting the effort in. And the fact that that's not a one-time cycle, that's going to keep happening on a day-to-day basis. And I think that vulnerability is really important. I was listening to Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO this morning, and an episode he's just recorded with Jimmy Carr, the comedian, who I love, because I'm a big fan of one-liners and dad jokes. And they were talking in there about, the fact that realistically, if you're not experiencing some form of imposter syndrome at least once every 18 months, then you're stuck, you're cozy, you're not going anywhere. And actually, you probably need to experience that just to push yourself on that little bit further. I just thought that was really timely, given that then that happened as soon as we started the training. It's like, oh, it's all different.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the thing about software, isn't it? I mean, I don't really spend much time training people to use software, but I've done lots of IT support in the past and things, and part of it is that it changes all the time, right? I mean, you can learn something now in 6 months, it might all look completely different, it might behave completely different, and I guess just being open and honest and upfront about that, and I suppose it happening in a training session is kind of useful to illustrate the point in a way.
It's brilliant, because the flip side of that is people look at you when you're standing there and you're doing a keynote or you're doing a demonstration, whatever, and they go, well, of course you can do it, because you do it all the time. But then they don't see that as being as achievable for them. And I think more and more, particularly in education, we need to embrace that vulnerability and say, actually, look, none of us really know. We're all, to a certain extent, building the plane while we're flying it, particularly with AI and everything else. So let's just be open and share. And, in some cases it works really well, and in other cases not so much. But I think it's one of the things that's got to change moving forward, because we are all in it together. Ultimately, who's it for? It's for the kids. and therefore we've got to come to an agreement, a consensus, whatever, on the best way of moving that sort of thing forward for them. And for me, that is through collaboration.
Well, look, I have a very long list of questions, and there is no way we can get through all of these questions. I think it would probably take like 4 hours, to be honest.
Nobody wants to listen for 4 hours. Yeah.
So it might come across as incredibly random, because I'm just going to pick little things out and just see what happens. Since you talking about deep things, let's try this one, shall we? There's a little preamble here. Considering the vast global population, it's striking how few people we actually meet. Using rough calculations, an average person might interact with around 40,000 to 80,000 people in their lifetime. People who you might actually talk to, rather than just walking past in the street. If you're very sociable, perhaps up to 200,000. But with 8.1 billion people in the world, this means you'll only ever meet around 0.0025% of the current population. So most of humanity remains a mystery to us firsthand. So given these odds, the chance of us meeting and even talking on a video podcast is incredibly slim.
Yeah.
So does this realization make this moment seem more significant to you? And do you think people understand how unique each human interaction really is? Or do most encounters feel too trivial to matter?
Oh, wow. Okay.
You wanted it deep, right?
Yeah. Fascinating stats. So straight away, I've been doing some work with some pupils around their own personal branding and careers and stuff, and looking at with them, sixth form students, I should say. Sorry, looking with them at Dunbar's number, and that principle that you can really make very good connections with a small number of people. And then beyond that, you've got a certain amount of capacity, and beyond that, you move into acquaintances and people you know, but you don't really care too deeply about, and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So it's an interesting kind of correlation between that. In that, yeah, but 0.002.
0.0025. 0.0025.
0.0025.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So, I mean, essentially, you have no chance of getting it up to 1% in your lifetime. It just cannot happen unless you just spend all your time meeting a new person every single second of your life.
And what's the point in doing that? Just to hit a number, right? Comes back.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah.
About connections and the value you get from those connections. And actually, talking about the Diary of a CEO podcast, they were talking about that very same thing, actually, in that they were talking about the fact that, with, a lot of young people, particularly these days, spending an awful lot of time online gaming. Jimmy Carr was saying that, that's essentially a proxy for a career, because that's given them the opportunity to develop and progress in a career that they don't have yet, because they're in school and they can't then do that. And then in certain cases, the propensity to visit certain X-rated websites and things like that is actually a proxy for sexual relationships that they're not having, but how that then feeds those dopamine levels in an artificial way. And if we don't have the human connections, like Jimmy Carr was saying about, for example, learning to shave. I learned to shave from my dad, but a lot of young people these days will learn to shave from watching YouTube, and therefore there's not necessarily that bonding moment that goes on as you're learning. You cut yourself, right? How'd you deal with a cut? This, that, and that sharing of those special moments. Maybe, and this is my own thinking on it. Maybe therefore those kind of, although the learning experience or the learning outcome might be on paper very similar, the actual, I suppose, progress as opposed to growth is different, in that you might make progress. I couldn't shave, I now can. You might see that as progress, whereas growth, I couldn't shave, I now can, but I've also had a really good laugh with my dad. He's cut himself, I've cut myself, we both dealt with that.
We're all laughing as we're cutting ourselves.
Exactly. And that whole bonding experience, creating much more of a memory. And as we know from studies into things like Alzheimer's and all those kind of things, memory is a very, very strong emotion, and positive or negative. I was unfortunate. My mother-in-law had early onset frontal temporal dementia, so we lost her age 63, and probably for the last 3 years of her life, the only thing she responded to was music, because she liked it or she hated it, or something that was hilariously funny, or something that was really actually pretty terrible. And her reactions weren't always appropriate, as you can imagine. But that was the only time we got any kind of emotion from her in probably the last 3 years of her life, because it was stimulating those memories clearly in her brain that was still in there and still active. And that was the only time we got to see her in those last few years of her life. So I think, those personal connections are all the more important, as long as they are quality connections. And like you say, not just ticking them off. How many people have I spoken to this week? And it's easy to do it. As a teacher, I used to try and, on a Friday afternoon, make a point of ringing 3 parents at the end of the week to give a positive phone call home for 3 kids. Because it would make me feel happier at the end of the week. I'd go away to my weekend going, I've made 3 positive phone calls, and that would close off my week. But also, 9 times out of 10, it would also make the weekend for those kids who then parents have got a phone call and it was really positive, and hopefully they come back on a Monday and they've had a really good weekend as a result of it. So I used to try and do that as much as possible. But then I was conscious that sometimes I only really wanted to make 2 calls. But I said I was going to do 3, so then I'm scrabbling around for another one because I'm trying to hit a quota. Then you start to question, well, how valid was that then? Am I just doing it for doing it? Actually, were there some weeks where I don't really have any justifiable reason for ringing anybody, but I'm doing it because it will make me feel better? And there's an interesting kind of balance around that as well. So, I think, it does make you appreciate it more, to come back to your question, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I just can't stop thinking about all the people who, you could get on famously with, who could be your best mate, who you will never meet. You will never get that chance.
And that was one of the motivators behind me learning languages, actually, because I was a language teacher. So I taught French, Spanish, German. But over my time at school, I did French and German at GCSE, really enjoyed it. And I got the opportunity to do Russian GCSE on a Saturday morning at our local 6th form when I was in year 10 and 11. So I did French, German, Russian GCSE. And then when I went to 6th form, I had the option to do Spanish GCSE in a year. So I did the Spanish GCSE and really enjoyed it. And they offered me the opportunity to do the A-level the following year. Really enjoyed that. So I ended up going off to university and doing the degree in Spanish and Latin American studies, and then taught Spanish, French and German for 20, 25 years. German less so, because it kind of phased out in the schools I was working in. But obviously that opened up a whole new opportunity, because prior to that, I would have only spoken probably to the English-speaking people, but then I got the opportunity to speak, and to go and live in Spain and Mexico. And I did work experience in Germany. I worked for Lufthansa when I was 16. Did 3 weeks work experience at Lufthansa in Cologne. Lots of opportunities to do like exchanges and things like that, and met people that I would never have met if I hadn't learned the languages. So, it's just opening up more opportunities.
Yeah, I think, I'm still in Thailand. I think I've told you that before. Yeah, and I've been out here. It'll be 2 years in August, and I've met someone and got engaged while I've been out here. And
I just always
think, thank you very much. But it just emphasizes that even more for me. I went to the other side of the world and met somebody who's lived and grown up in a completely different way to how I did in the UK. I mean, very little in common, really. Even you wouldn't believe, just the popular culture stuff that you take for granted, that I could just talk to you and know that you'll know about the Beatles. To pick a really, really obvious one. And my fiance doesn't know anything about the Beatles. I don't think she's even heard of the Beatles. But we have these conversations all the time, and it's just like, really? Oh my God.
But that's such a great opportunity to open up a new world, isn't it? You've never heard of the Beatles, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I mean, another example, the film Titanic. I'm guessing you've seen the film Titanic.
Yeah, no spoilers though. Just in case anyone's listening.
Yeah, no spoilers, of course. No, I mean, we wouldn't want to go that far. That'd be awful. But yeah, she'd never seen the film Titanic, so I got to introduce her to that. And
it's not even one of my favorite films.
Was that an intentional pun?
It might have been.
All right, just so we're clear, that is the level you can expect.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm aware that this could go so quickly now. We've done half an hour already, and I think I've asked you one question off my list. And really, I want to get onto AI. So I think, much as I could, there's so many things I would like to touch on. But let's go to AI, shall we? Why not?
We'll get AI to answer it, and we'll get through them quicker. So.
Do you think it will be quicker? Will it be quicker? Yeah, I mean, okay. What do you know about AI?
What do I know about AI? I know what I know, and I think that
the end.
That's yeah, and that's the problem, isn't it? That AI's got huge potential to reduce the digital divide, but at the same time expand the digital divide, because you've got digital divide in terms of knowledge and access, and then you've got digital divide in terms of knowledge and ability and skill, and digital divides in terms of access to being able to use those tools in the first place and knowing how to use those tools as well. So I think it's got huge potential to be a real catalyst for democratizing creativity and for want of a better word, I suppose, productivity.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you don't have the access to those tools, or you don't have the devices to access those tools, then you're going to fall further and further away. So the democratization side of things, I think, is really good, and I do think that there's a shift coming. And I have a lot of conversations, particularly with school staff, around the concept of industry standard tools and what we should or shouldn't be using with pupils. So the long-standing argument about whether pupils doing a photography course or a media course have to, for example, use Photoshop. Of course, they don't have to. The exam boards don't specify that you have to. But a lot of people will say that they have to learn Photoshop because that's industry standard.
Yeah.
But with the development of technology at the rate it's going in now, and with alternatives that are cloud-based like Photopia or Photopea, however you pronounce it, I'm never sure, Canva and what they've got available, Adobe's online options as well through Express, things you can do with ChatGPT now, and various other tools. I think we'll quickly move to a situation where the vast majority of people will be, if you're talking about like consumers of digital media, for example, the vast majority of people will be happy with a very good product at a very reasonable price over an exceptional product at an exceptional price. So I think we might see a kind of a shift in the landscape where there are still the need for those really top level skills, and the very, very best Photoshoppers and all that kind of thing, they will fall into the top 5%, and there will be a case for them, and there will be business for them, and there will be a charge for them, and it will be premium. But a lot of people will be happy to be able to say, you know what, I've got my wedding coming up. I could pay a wedding videographer, for example, a huge amount of money, or I could ask people to capture stuff on their phones, share it all with me, and then I could ask AI to make it into a compilation video for me, throw on some useful songs, and do all the transitions in a few minutes. And a lot of people will be very happy with that outcome, I think.
Yeah.
So when we talk about industry standard, are we talking about industry standard for everybody? In which case, that Photoshop's not going to be. It might be for the very top 5%, and good luck to them. All power to them. Hope they make their fortune. Because their skill will be undoubtedly far superior to anybody else's. But the vast majority might be quite content with having a very good product, a fraction of the price and a fraction of the time it takes to create it. Particularly in a society where we're used to next day delivery, and going back to Amazon again, other delivery companies are available, obviously. But so I think there's a real shift there that we've got to be aware of in education, because 9 times out of 10, when we talk about what we consider to be industry standard, we're going by what we know, but what we know is often out of date already.
Yeah.
And we're going, it was industry standard 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It doesn't mean it is now.
I think Photoshop's a good example of that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, Canva have now acquired Affinity as well. So you've got a direct competitor there, completely cloud-based, accessible anywhere. And from an education perspective, I look at that and say, okay, we can have students using Photoshop in their work, but they can only use that when they're sat at the computer that's got it installed in the classroom for that hour on that particular day. Or if they want to, they can go and work on it online. That obviously raises challenges around things like controlled assessment and how you protect the integrity of those sorts of things. But the potential is huge for being able to make those sorts of skills available and to give people the opportunity and the time to delve into the things that they're really interested in, which is often a criticism of the current education curriculum, that it's so rigid and it's so regimented and fast paced. Is it any wonder that attendance is down as a trend? Because where's the agency in that? Where are the pupils getting the opportunity to make their own choices? Or are they just being told, no, you've got to do this because it's on the specification, and you've got to do this week and this next week? Where did they get the choice to say, well, actually, I'd like to see where this takes me? Where does that take me? And it's that agency that stimulates those dopamine levels, that gives them those intrinsic rewards that potentially then has a positive knock-on impact on their self-esteem, their mental health, their behavior around the school building, and all those, and obviously then how they go on in later life, because at the end of the day, you hire character over qualifications every day of the week.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess throughout history, everybody's kind of grown up with the same system. I mean, we haven't really got any way to kind of tailor things for individual pupils until kind of now. I mean, it's just kind of starting now, isn't it, really, with AI tools being available?
And, the classic water cooler moment is a really good example of that. And if you go back 20 years, we'd have all been gathering at the water cooler in the staff room or in the office, whatever, all talking about the same program we all watched on TV last night, because 20 million people across the UK watched it. Whereas now everyone's talking about different things, because one's binge watching this and one's been doing that on YouTube. And they might have all been in the same room, but they're watching different things on different devices. And you haven't got that same common connectivity, if you like, because choice has grown massively.
Yeah. And that's only going to just keep going like that, isn't it? I mean, we're very, very close to being able to just create whatever you want to watch just from a text prompt. I mean, we've all seen Sora by this point, right?
Yeah.
You can understand why they're being very cagey about Sora, I suppose, and and they're now sort of saying, well, it's just research, it's nowhere near releasable, because it's almost too powerful a tool to give people, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you've got the same thing with gaming as well now, and you've got platforms where you can do text to game. I'd like a game that does this. Here's a sketch I've made. I'd like it to look a bit like that. Make it a playable game for me, and away you go. So I mean, there is an argument, and Dr. Nick Jackson, who's a great guy to follow on LinkedIn as well, made the point at an event we were at back in September. How long are we going to, if you like, agree to disagree, or whatever? How long are we going to flog the horse of we need to teach computing and coding?
Right.
Because the vast majority of people are going to be able to do that through natural language.
Yeah. Well,
so again, are we looking at that top 5% need it because they're coding the AI? But for the regular consumer, do you need to be able to code? No, because can you just ask it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, already you can do that now.
Yeah.
So a couple of years from now.
And that, I think that's exciting, because that brings in a whole different element as a counter argument of actually then literacy and oracy become more important, because how you ask determines your output.
Yeah.
And where a lot of people will say, all this technology, what about reading books and everything else? Well, actually, there's a real opportunity to use tools like AI tools to say, okay, this is the output from the tool. How could we have changed our prompt to get a better, less biased, more balanced, more formal, more casual output? And then working through that as an individual, within a work environment, within a school environment, say, so how do we need to change this to get the very best out of it? Ultimately, it's going to teach us to be very clear with our instruction, which I think is massively lacking quite often in society,
I don't know about you, but I've found recently, well, for the past year or more, that I need to learn more adjectives. It gets to the point where you haven't got quite what you wanted out of the generative AI that you're using, and you think, I kind of know what I want, but I don't quite know how to describe it. I mean, I thought I did, but...
Yeah, I've found that Gemini over ChatGPT is far more verbose and a lot more literary in its approach. I'm not advocating one over the other at all, but if I want something a little bit more kind of nuanced and flowery, for want of a better word, quite often I'll use Gemini, whereas if I just want to get to the point, I'll use ChatGPT. And the same prompts will give you two very different outputs, so I quite enjoy playing around with that, and then asking each one to reflect on the other one is quite a nice little game to play. I did ask, I asked Gemini to tell me, or to rate Gemini and ChatGPT for a particular purpose. I just thought I'd test it out. So I asked it to rate Gemini and ChatGPT, to look at the potential prompts that came out of it. I put them back in and said, now summarize these two prompts, tell me which one's the best one for this use case. And actually, to be fair to it, it did say ChatGPT is the best one in this case, which surprised me. But it just shows that, it's not all mechanical and contrived.
Oh, yeah.
So it very much, you get your prompt engineering right, and that's a challenge for people. A lot of people still don't know what a prompt is. So if you say to them, write a prompt, they kind of go, a what?
It's kind of strange that there hasn't been kind of more from the manufacturers of these bits of software about actually how to use it. I know they want it to be more like an iPhone, where it doesn't come with any instructions. You're just it's supposed to be so intuitive, and in a way they are, but there's also lots of hidden things that just help you to get better results that they never tell you.
Yeah, but I suppose that's part of the experimental learning curve of it, isn't it? That if people just using it naturally and getting it wrong, they're learning how people use it naturally, and then can hopefully steer people in the right way. Not that I would advocate that for all situations. Like, I wouldn't give somebody a car and go drive it and then refer back and go, yeah, well, they got that bit wrong when they plowed into a wall. We'll make sure they don't do that next time, But it is that learning experience for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, just as I was finishing saying that, I just realized that it was completely wrong anyway, because OpenAI and Google and people like that don't actually know how these things work. And these language models do exhibit emergent properties, as they call them, which are things that they've learned how to do by themselves that they weren't programmed to do, they weren't trained to do.
Yeah.
So, such as, different languages, being able to do things in different languages, but all sorts of things. And people have found out tricks afterwards such as, think step by step, things like that, which will just tell it to spend more time processing it and gives you a better result. But they didn't know that when they released it.
No. No, and the language aspect, obviously, as a linguist myself, I find that really fascinating because languages constantly evolve anyway. And I've never been one of these people who gets like really hung up about spelling and grammar, because I'm like, okay, that's the spelling and that's the grammar at the moment. It might not have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. It's changed, and sometimes it's gone back round in full circle. So when you're looking at a learning module and a format like large language models, if they're learning the language as they go and they're starting to interpret and they're starting to estimate what might be the natural following words to then complete the sentence and so on, it's only to be expected that they'll start to make connections between languages, because that's all in there as part of its training data, and therefore similar words, it will start to suggest, well, that's very similar to that, so I'm going to imagine that would follow it, and it will start to get it right. And then as people feed back, it will improve. And I think this is the key bit. A lot of people, particularly sometimes on Twitter and elsewhere, who will say AI is not very good.
Very sweeping statement.
Yeah, but if you don't give it the feedback, it won't be. And my challenge is always, okay, so tell it. Because if you don't tell it...
The question is, what is good?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
What the AI thinks is good isn't... It might be good for the AI, but you might not agree.
And what you've asked it to do might not have been a very good way of asking it, or a good thing to ask it. And like anything, it's about the right tools for the right jobs. But I do think there's an element of, like, we have a responsibility. We can't complain about AI if we're not prepared to put some work in. And it is a learning format, so it needs to be taught. And if we don't teach it, we then can't kind of sit back and go, oh, it's rubbish, it's not very useful. Because actually there's other people who are giving that feedback and are teaching it and are learning along with it, who are finding it incredibly useful. And some of the things that have been done in the medical field in terms of pattern spotting for early diagnosis of various different things, absolutely incredible. So you can't tell me AI is no good.
It's just too sweeping a statement, isn't it? I mean, it's almost an ignorant statement, I think.
Yeah,
but maybe that does come just from a place of being underinformed about it. I don't know.
Yeah, too focused in one main area, maybe. But
yeah. Okay, next one. What happens when AI exceeds human intelligence? To clarify, for most things.
Yeah. See, I've made a point over the last couple of sessions I've done with staff of making the point that if we don't provide that feedback, AI will eat itself, because garbage in, garbage out, right? And if you put garbage in, you get garbage out, and then you feed that garbage back in, and you keep doing that, and you don't improve it, and you don't give it any feedback, and you don't tweak it, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, to the point where it'd be completely useless. So people talk about technology and robots and taking control from us, and that's never going to happen as far as I'm concerned. We might give it away, and we might say, I'm very happy for the AI to do, like, I'm very happy for the AI, or for the technology, I should say. I'm very happy for the technology in my house to turn the kettle on for me. Because I've got a device, I can ask it to turn the kettle on. By the time I get downstairs, it's boiled. Quite happy for that. It's not a big deal. Okay. If Amazon or whoever learn how many cups of coffee I have off the back of that, well, fair play to them. I don't really care. If it means I get cheaper coffee, fantastic. But there are other things that I wouldn't be happy to give away. And I think that's where we've got to find our own level, if you like. What information are we prepared to share and what aren't we? And that's going to be different for different people and different use cases as well. So I think as individuals, we've got a responsibility to be thinking about, what are we prepared to sacrifice or give away? Because it's like anything. If you're going to use a free tool, right?
What do you mean by give away exactly in this context?
So, for example, if you're going to use ChatGPT 3.5, okay, you are giving away potentially information to be used to train the model.
Yeah, but I mean, that's only by design, though. You can turn that off.
You can turn that off, but essentially, for the vast majority of people who aren't going to know, they'll just go, yeah, no, I'm giving this information away. I'll write me a letter about, I want to reduce my, I don't know, my energy bills or whatever. You soon realize you're starting to give away information there, because free tools are basically, there's a cost everywhere, right?
Yeah. They say you're the product if you're not paying.
Exactly. I can't remember
something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. Whereas as you start paying for things, you start to enter into the realm of, now you've got a little bit of control, but there's also then the element, okay, well, what do you pay for? Because we've already said, right tools for the right job. Does that mean you need 7 or 8, 9, 10 different tools that you pay for? And before you know it, you're up to, £200 a month because you're paying a little bit for this, a little bit for that. And if you're in a big organization that can afford to do that, great. But if you're working on your own, you might be at most in need of that AI support because your resources are at minimum. You really need to maximize your time, and you can very easily fall into the trap of signing up for various different things and ending up being no better off as a result of it. So I think we've got to be conscious of what we're prepared to share, what we're prepared to contribute. I think I don't see it ever being a robots take over the world kind of situation.
Well, let's say they don't take over the world, but if they are able to outthink most people in the same way that somebody is going to doing a PhD somewhere who's going to be able to outthink me 10 times that, because that's the stated goal of OpenAI, right? But the idea is that it's a machine that can outthink most humans about most things most of the time.
Yeah.
And probably come up with stuff that we haven't been able to come up with ourselves.
That's incredibly exciting at the same time.
Very exciting. But I suppose the question is, do humans become pets to AIs at some point?
I mean, I look at my sausage dog, and I sometimes think that's not a bad life.
Yeah.
Lay in the sun, get fed, do what you want to do, get some attention when you want it, chase something.
If all your needs are met, does it matter that you don't actually have control?
That brings it round to what makes you happy, and what makes you feel fulfilled. And if you are fulfilled, does it matter if everything that everything in your life is to a certain extent automated or taken care of by somebody else, and you don't have to worry about it? I mean, I can imagine, particularly like certain people, the opportunity to have AI manage your finances for you, absolutely fantastic for people who really can't do it.
Well, not even if you can't do it. I mean, if it can do it better than you can do it without you having to think about it.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about, going back to, my mother-in-law. She had no way of managing her money for probably the last 10 years of her life. She just wasted it. And that was, obviously, we didn't have a diagnosis at that point. But if we'd have been able to say, hold on a minute, let's have some form of regulation on your account that is going to go, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, why are you buying cheese? Don't buy cheese. That would have been so helpful in helping us, and it would help the medical profession as well in terms of spotting patterns of behaviors that potentially could lead to earlier diagnoses, that potentially could lead to, less kind of tragic circumstances. But then you've got the flip side of that as well, that if we keep making people better and we keep making people live longer, then that puts a strain on NHS or resources wherever you happen to be, but also populations in general, prisons, the whole lot. At some point, you're going to get to the point where you've got to do some balancing of the books. And that's not an easy conversation to have with anybody, is it? That's a deep philosophical kind of, at what point do we say, or should we say, for example, okay, well, our prisons are full, so how do we empty some of those out? Do we just build more? Do we empty the ones we've already got? Do we part empty them? And I had a really good conversation with my daughter yesterday, about the death penalty, because she was asking,
keep it light with the children.
Absolutely. Why are we suddenly in a situation where all of our prisons are full? And we talked about it, and got into the fact that, well, going back in generations, they wouldn't have been full, because a lot of these people would have been, killed, for want of a better word, as part of the justice process, and still are in some countries in the world. And we had a really deep conversation around whether that was right or not. And obviously the issues around, misrepresentation and incorrect, like judgments, and people being found guilty when they weren't, and later, developments in science and forensics, meaning that they were later cleared. But ultimately, we've either got to change the system and redesign it to be fit for purpose, or we've got to find a way of making the capacity meet the demand. And that's not an easy conversation to have. So I always find myself very conflicted with talk around like medical and all those kind of things, where we talk about elongating life, because at the same time that's then putting extra demand. And also, what about quality of life as well? Because at the same time, we're having, there are conversations going on about, having the choice of, assisted dying and things like that. That actually, might that become AI assisted down the line?
Ooh, okay.
That goes wrong, in that, you've got a system set up that when you get to this point, you say this and it delivers enough drugs to,
Ooh.
and then, and then you head down a whole different ethical kind of. So actually, who assisted you? Because obviously, in the UK at the moment, assisted dying, if you assist somebody, that's a crime. But if it's an AI that's assisted you, who's responsible for that? A little bit like car insurance, self-driving car, and you have an accident with it, actually, whose fault is it?
Because if you generate something with ChatGPT now, you own the copyright to what comes out of it, because you provided the input. So I wonder if it's the case that if you have some sort of assisted dying AI machine, are you responsible? Because you put the input in to say, at this point, I want you to push the button, as it were.
These are all really important conversations, aren't they?
I hadn't even thought about this.
No, and 5 years ago, no one would have been thinking about this.
No.
And 10 years ago, people would have laughed. 50 years ago, we didn't even have hot showers. And everyone would have gone, hot water coming out, and what? And you can have a shower with hot water? No, that'd be ridiculous.
I'm sure somebody must have had a hot shower 50 years ago.
Might have done something. Maybe
it can't have been that unusual.
A tank on the roof, and it happened to warm up. This is all right, But and that's the thing, that the speed that things are moving along, quite often our processes and our systems don't move anywhere near the same speed, and therefore we end up with massive loopholes and massive problems, because we're not dealing with systems that are fit for purpose, because we're not we're not prepared to make the change quick enough, because everyone wants change, but nobody wants to make the change, right?
But also, you always get into this situation where the people making the laws don't understand the technology. The sort of people you elect are not going to be particularly great at understanding technology, or they probably wouldn't be in that job.
No, exactly. And when you look at, I don't want to go political at all, but when you look at, what's required to become a member of parliament, qualifications aren't high on that list of.
It always amazes me. That there's no test. to sort of to be in a position like that.
You're in charge of defence today, but tomorrow we're putting you in charge of the health service, and then 3 months later, I mean, obviously, if you're in charge of education, quite often it's next day you're in charge of something else or whatever. But but yeah, that people just chop and change, and I don't have a problem with that as long as there is a constant within the system. In the okay, you're heading it up, but you've got a constant body that is advising you and giving you the right information. But if you have no knowledge, how do you know they're advising you well? And that comes back to that unconscious competence, kind of conscious incompetence balance of actually, if you have no idea, if you're in that unconscious incompetence, I've taken over being in charge of the National Health Service because I'm Secretary of State for Health or whatever. This is what my advisors tell me. So I'm just going to say that on a news broadcast. Are you worried? Probably not. Blissful ignorance.
Yeah, well, I mean, another way to look at it is if they don't understand what it is they're being fed, what they're going to do, they're probably going to go and ask ChatGPT.
Possible.
And then you could have, and you might already have ChatGPT essentially creating government policy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's already happening.
Absolutely. And I've often joked, and other people have said it as well, particularly within education, you could have AI create a lesson for you and some homework. Pupils get the AI to do the homework, and then the teacher gets the AI to mark the homework and give feedback, and then the pupil ignores it. So you've got a complete feedback loop of everybody trying to do something with a good intention, because I've got to set some work. I've done that. I've got to set some homework. I've done that. I've got to do my homework. I've done that. I've got to mark my homework. I've done that. Have we all done what we were supposed to do? Yes. What have we gained? Nothing at all. And that's my worry about, the option that's arriving, and, we're on a different platform at the moment, but the option to send an AI to a meeting for you. What happens when only the AIs turn up? Yeah. So everyone sends their AI counterpart.
I guess it depends how personalized they have become. Because I mean, at the moment, not at all, right? There are some very, very small ways you can start to personalize them. And did you use Pi? PI? Was it inflection?
I've experimented with it a little bit. I haven't used it extensively, but yeah.
Well, that was the idea behind that. It was supposed to become your own personal AI and learn more about you. But then recently, Microsoft did some weird thing where they've just poached all the staff. Pretty much everybody has gone. And overnight, they just said, well, we're not going to be developing Pi anymore because they've just all gone to Microsoft.
AI is hugely expensive, not just in terms of financially, but in terms of resources. So there is that environmental argument as well about all of this AI is then having a drain on the planet resources. How do we make sure we don't kind of burn the candle at both ends, for want of a better word? And of course we could ask the AI, but that's probably counterintuitive. But I do think AI has got. I'm hopeful that AI enables us to release enough of the mundane, everyday stuff that enables us to appreciate the human stuff on a day-to-day basis that really matters.
Right.
That's my ultimate aim. And I try to work on an 80-20 basis. So if I can get the technology, whether it's AI or whether it's just technology in general, if I can get the technology to do 80% of what I need to do, and then I do a 20% uplift on that with my own knowledge, my own personality, if I can find one at the time, my own my own knowledge of my audience, what's gone before, where it's moving to next, and all that kind of thing, and that wider context that the AI maybe doesn't have. If I can do that, that should give me the capacity to be able to balance my workload, deliver results to people as in a way that they're expecting, within a timeline that's appropriate, but at the same time enable me to also have a good quality of life at the same time.
Yeah.
And that means, sometimes that means just turning everything off and going fishing for the day, just getting away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's so nice to do that, isn't it? Just to leave your phone at home. I don't think many people do that very often, but it is.
No. And it's the one time I do, because I know there's no signal at the lake where I fish, so there's no point in taking it. I just go and I spend the whole day there and appreciate nature and the ripples in the water from the wind and the getting attacked by swarms of bees, as I did the other day.
Is that your highlight? Yeah, that's the best bit.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I was like, what on earth is that noise? Oh, that sort of thing. And I just dived into a bush out of the way, sort of thing, hoping that my rod didn't go off at the same time. But actually, again, it comes back to that has then created a memory that's made me smile. It's released some endorphins, it released some adrenaline at the time, but actually it's given me something to connect back to. So next time I go, I'll be sitting there and I'll think back to when I was sat here last time. It was a big swarm of bees. What happened to them? I wonder where they ended up. I wonder, at some point in life, thinking 0.00025, at some point in life, am I going to eat their honey? I don't know, right?
Yeah, it could be your neighbour's bees.
Yeah,
potentially.
That's why I love the fishing, because it gives me the time to have all of those thoughts without the interruptions. A
friend of mine from school was so keen on fishing, from the age of about 10, and he still is, I think. And I think it's just this. It's kind of almost meditation, I think, for him.
Yeah,
that's really the function that it provides. Yeah.
I really noticed it. If I've not been for a while,
right,
I really feel that I change personality-wise, and I will get people who say, "You've not been fishing for a while, have you?" I'm like, okay, I probably need.
Is it that obvious?
Yeah.
And apparently it is. Yeah, but yeah, it definitely is a massive form of meditation from my perspective.
I think that's a really nice thing to end on, don't you? I think that's a very nice thought to leave people with. I'm really annoyed, Daren, because there's so many questions I've got on here, and I think we did about 3. There's probably about 100.
It's because I talk too much.
Well, I don't think you can talk too much on something like this, can you? Is that possible?
No, probably not. No, maybe too much. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, it's been really interesting, but as I say, I would like to just carry on for another maybe 3 hours. Have you got 3 hours now, or?
I probably have, to be honest with you, but whether everybody else has is another matter.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, maybe we can have a rematch at some point.
Sounds good, definitely.
Look, thank you so much, Daren. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Keiran. That's been good fun. I've enjoyed it.